Well, the Georgia Bulldogs did indeed take a little bit of a step back last year, and that's 2 straight years after a back-to-back national championship run that they do not win the national championship. We're going to have to see if Georgia can get back on this path. A lot of people are kind of sleeping on the Dogs this year. Make sure that you don't make Kirby Smart the underdog. That's what we're going to be trying to talk about here today. I am Colin Bashnigal, your host here at Bash's CFB Show. You can find me over here on TikTok at Bash's CFB Show. And then you could also make sure to comment down below and tell me what you think of the Georgia Bulldogs this upcoming season. And like the video if you like the video, and subscribe for more content. So when we look at the 2024 version of the Georgia Bulldogs, a very interesting team to talk about. A lot of problems that the fans have with Mike Bobo. They had problems with Carson Beck last year with the turnover bug, but then also those wide receivers with all the drops. Even with all those problems, though, they had a 10-2 regular season. They beat Texas on the road, which was a huge statement when they did lose to Alabama in a thrilling game in which they fell down big, stormed back, took the lead, and then surrendered the lead basically immediately. They lost to Ole Miss on the road, but both of their conference losses were road losses, and they didn't end up being a detriment to their chances to win the SEC because guess what? Even in a down year, Kirby Smart and the Georgia Bulldogs still win the SEC. Losing to Notre Dame in the fashion they did, though, after they beat Texas twice, that was shocking. It was shocking to a lot of people, including myself. I did not expect for Notre Dame to just go out there and really show for 4 quarters that they're going to be the better team in all phases of the game, but that's what they were able to do. So Georgia now has to turn the page. And how do they turn the page? Well, they watch Carson Beck, who got injured, by the way, in the SEC championship game, of course, and Gunnar Stockton replaced him. They watched him walk out the door. Now, Gunnar Stockton expected to be the starter. I firmly believe he will be the starter. However, I will say this. Ryan Puglisi has a lot of potential, a lot of upside. I'm just saying if some point in the second year at Georgia, he starts showing that he's going to be the better option to win, don't be surprised if you see a midseason switch. Out of the portal, they added a couple of weapons for Gunnar Stockton to use. Noah Thomas comes in, the big 6'6" wide receiver that can run from Texas A&M. And then you also got the speedster, Zachariah Branch. I mean, in his very first college football game, it was, I believe, a week 0 game where USC played San Jose State, and that was Caleb Williams' final year at USC, his second year over there. Yeah, he showed off that explosiveness and that ability, and we all knew ever since then that it was there, but it never fully pieced together. They also bring back guys like Dylan Bell and Colby Young, who was a Miami transfer prior to coming over, London Humphreys, a former Vanderbilt transfer. So I think their wide receiver room, some of those guys returning need to take a step forward. I think they can. I'm also going to be watching for some younger players to really step up. Who exactly, I'm not quite sure, but they have a lot of young players who are going to challenge a lot of these more experienced wide receivers if they have a lot of the same problems that they had a year ago. Love their tight end room. Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, both really good players. Then you get down to Jaden Riddell. You know, we don't know what he's going to look like necessarily, but with it being a Georgia tight end, you can assume he's going to be pretty good. The running back room is also still pretty solid. They did lose Trevor Etienne from a year ago, but they bring back Nate Frazier, a guy who really hit the scene as a true freshman a year ago. He's coming back for his sophomore year, and they brought in Josh McCray. It's more of the short yardage back from Illinois. I'm not as high on that, by the way, as a lot of other people are. But I've really heard a lot of fantastic things by Chauncey Bowens. If you look at many depth charts, he's going to be buried. I've heard that Chauncey Bowens in this running back room is a guy that could potentially challenge for a lot of playing time. And you know how Georgia is. They like to rotate in those running backs. How's this offensive line going to be looking? Well, I think it's going to be pretty decent. but not vintage Georgia. Not too many names that you're looking at as like, oh, that guy's going to be a borderline or in the first round. We're not talking about this O-line that way. Now, when we look at the defensive side of the ball, I think they have a lot of talent. Kristen Miller, he is going to be a really solid player as a defensive lineman. I love the talent that Jordan Hall is too. Their D-line is going to be good, and I think they're deep too. Xavier McLeod, he's coming off the bench, by the way, and they have a true freshman, Elijah Griffin, that they're very high on. CJ Allen is an absolute beast at linebacker. I think they're good at that spot. Daniel Harris as the quarterback on one side. Dalen Everett is back for his senior year on the other side. KJ Bolden at safety is an amazing player. Ja'Cory Thomas, he's a senior, experienced, been in the system for a while. I think that this defense is just going to be another really good Kirby Smart defense, and Glenn Schumann calling the plays over there. I definitely think that this Georgia team is not to be slept on. Like, I just went on a ramble for the last few minutes talking about how talented this team is. And they got to piece together some things on offense, but ultimately, even if they're just a repeat of what they were last year, they should have no problem competing for the SEC. And I think that they could be better than they were a year ago, too. So the out-of-conference schedule, you look at these 4 out-of-conference games. Georgia Tech, of course, every single year, but the other 3 are against bad competition. You got first-year head coach over at Marshall. It is an interesting situation over there. Charlotte welcoming in Tim Albin. That's a little bit of a rebuild over there. And then Austin Peay, an FCS program. So really, when you're looking at Georgia, you got the SEC slate starts week 3, and then the season really gets kickstarted for Georgia. I think a lot of Georgia fans don't necessarily prefer it. I think Georgia fans actually prefer playing Clemson or Oregon or Notre Dame early in the season, something to look forward to. Well, they got nothing for the first 2 weeks. Then they play on the road at Tennessee. Of course, drawing Alabama, Auburn. Those are a couple of tough games. Florida, if they're expected to be a lot better by many people. I mean, they were ranked in the preseason top 15, I believe, in the AP poll. And then, of course, Texas, tied for being the odds-on favorite to win the national championship, AP poll #1 team in the country. It's going to be a tough schedule. Ole Miss, how could I even forget about Ole Miss? Yeah, this is going to be a very tough schedule, but is it as tough as what it's cracked up to be? I'm not thinking it is. Let's get to the schedule predictions here. We're going to start with giving them the 3 wins right here. I mean, Marshall, Austin Peay, Charlotte. Look, I'm excited to see what Tim Albin turned Charlotte into. Marshall didn't have the resources for Charles Huff to stick around. None of those teams are going to even keep it within 30 points against Georgia. At Tennessee. Now, I'm going to try to fit in a Tennessee preview here. I am not very high on Tennessee right now. They are replacing basically everything on the offensive line. We don't exactly know how good they're going to be able to run the ball. And, oh, yeah, I don't think Joey Aguilar is a good player. Like, I no offense to the kid or anything like that. I really don't think he's that good of a college quarterback. So when UCLA picked him up, he was kind of an afterthought. They totally upgraded when they took Nico. And Tennessee fans need to accept that. This offense is going to be a disaster. They're hardly going to score any points in this game. Even if their defense is really good, doubt they can keep them in this game. That's a lot of pressure. Georgia wins. Off the bye, they play Alabama. Look, Alabama's been a horrible team for Georgia to face now, albeit when Georgia has faced Alabama, they have not faced them between the hedges in Sanford Stadium. Well, they're doing it this year. And I'm doing it again. I'm doing it again. I'm picking Georgia to beat Alabama. This has only paid off for me once since they started playing. Look, Georgia should, at this point in the season, they're both off of a bye. They should be the slightly better rested team, but they also should be able to go toe-to-toe, lean on that defense, be able to get some stops. I think that this is really the game that you could see the importance of the quarterback being Ty Simpson in Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb's system, backfiring against them when that quarterback has certain limitations. See, Georgia can work with Gunnar Stockton having limitations. But I am curious to see what is Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb going to do if Ty Simpson is what I think he is, and he could just be a game manager that has certain limitations. I don't know. I mean, he was a talented kid coming out of high school, but for goodness sakes, I have not seen I have seen him on the field and I have not been impressed. So there's that. Kentucky, look, they sleptwalked through that game in Kroger Field last year. Probably could have lost that game. I got them winning this one pretty comfortably. I think Mark Stoops could potentially be out the door this year. We'll see how it all plays out, but I got Georgia winning and going 5-0 there. At Auburn, I'm pretty high on Auburn. I like their talent. I have heard some concerning reports about Jackson Arnold and how he's progressing in training camp. That's concerning, but the general consensus is, other than quarterback, the rest of the talent at Auburn is good enough to compete with anybody in the SEC, and that includes Georgia. I do think this is going to be a very tough game, but I think Georgia has their number still. I think Georgia's going to beat Auburn yet again, and they're going to move to 6-0 moving into the back half of the year, where they're going to play Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat them last year in Oxford, Mississippi, and it was a strange game for sure. I mean, you had a little bit of a monsoon at the end of the game. The way it started with Jackson Dart throwing an interception and then Austin Simmons having to come in and leading them down to the field with bounce of the ball here and a good throw here. I think Georgia gets the revenge, and I think they improved to 7-0 going into the bye week. Of course, we haven't gotten to the Charlotte game, obviously, but that's 8 guaranteed wins going into the second bye. They're going to play Florida, and again, this is a situation where both teams have the same bye week. This Florida team, I am not as high on as a lot of people, but I do think they have a lot of talent. I think they love Coach Napier, and assuming he's still here at this point in the season, I think this rivalry game could get very funky. Florida could have won that game a year ago. They came up short. They're looking to try to get that back yet again. I think they do. I think DJ Lagway puts together his best performance off the bye week with extra prep. This kid studies very hard. He's definitely got a good head on his shoulders. I think the biggest question is, has he gotten enough offseason reps to truly take that step forward, that leap forward from freshman to sophomore year? But I definitely think November 1st, off of a bye, an extra week to prepare, he's going to be playing his best football against the Georgia Bulldogs. At Mississippi State's a good bounce back spot for the Georgia Bulldogs. And Texas, do they want revenge from that 2 games that they lost to the Georgia Bulldogs a year ago? They're definitely going to want revenge. This is going to be in Athens, though, and that's always a very tough place to play. This Georgia team just does not lose at home very often. But I'm going to pick them to lose at home. Look, if Texas is going to peak, we shouldn't be talking about week 1 against Ohio State. I have a lot of thoughts on Texas week 1 against Ohio State. We should be talking about this game right here, because this game is going to be critical for the SEC race. I think it could be an elimination game for either team, and certainly if Georgia had already lost a game to whether it be Alabama or Florida or Tennessee, Auburn, Ole Miss, if they come into this game with 1 loss, I don't know if they're going to get the same fortune they had a year ago where they could still get into the SEC championship with 2 losses. I have this being a critical loss for Georgia. They close out the season after beating Charlotte, playing Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech gave them everything they could handle a year ago. I think this Georgia Tech team is really good. I think that they're not going to really elevate too much more, though, than what they were a year ago. Without going too deep into Georgia Tech, especially with this game being in Mercedes-Benz Stadium instead of in Bobby Dodd, I am taking the Georgia Bulldogs to win, making them 10-2 and 6-2 in conference. And look, 6-2 was good enough last year. It could potentially be good enough this year. When I say that, I don't know if they can get that luck to be able to bounce into the SEC championship like that, but with that being said, they could. They did it last year. This is the same exact virtually regular season that they had. I know losing to Florida is a little bit different and a problem, but 2 losses with impressive wins on the resume, like that is what Georgia football does at this point. Okay. They're going to make sure they get into that big dance, and we'll see how they perform in the big dance. I ultimately think we could see the best version of Kirby Smart's team in the playoff. I don't think that this Georgia team will show up a little bit flat and have just as difficult of a bowl season as it seemed like they had a year ago. I think that they're going to be a contender for the national championship, and nobody's talking about them. But with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Next up, we're going to circle back to the ACC. We're going to talk about Clemson. Make sure you tune in for that one. Have a good rest of your night or day whenever you're watching this, and I'll see you guys in the next video.